Hi everyone, welcome to the video lecture series of Object-Oriented Programming. In this video lecture, we'll be discussing about class diagram, another diagram that comes under UML modeling language. So we'll see what's class diagram and how to represent a class diagram. So class diagram, as the name indicates, we'll be describing a system in terms of classes. A class diagram always represents the static structure of a system. So when we draw a class diagram, it will not show how the system behaves, how the user is interacting with the system like use diagram. We will be describing only the different components of the system. So we will be describing the system in terms of so many classes. So when we draw a class diagram, the entire diagram consists of so many classes and how each of these classes are related to each other, how they are linked to each other. That will be what we see when we draw a class diagram. So a class diagram consists of so many classes and the relations like generalization, aggregation, and association. So to draw a class diagram, we must know what is a class and how to represent it. That is what we are going to see next. So what are classes? We have discussed this when we came across the object-oriented programming concepts. We know that classes are a collection of objects having similar properties. The same definition we are using here. A class represents entities with common features. Features means it can be attributes and operations. For example, the entire human being class, it can be considered as a single class because all the human beings have some common properties. 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 eyes. They know how to walk, how to run. So they are common to each and every human being. All set of laptops can be considered as a single class because all laptops will be having a keyboard, some USB ports. Even the number of USB ports may be different, but all of them will be having USB ports, HDMI cable connector, etc. etc. All the pens that we use to write can be considered as a single class. The company name, the ink color, the shape of the pen may be different, but all the pens have some common properties like they can be used to write. Okay, the pens will have a refill, all the pens will have a top, etc. So a class represents a collection of entities having some common features. By features we mean attributes and operations. And how can we represent a class in a class diagram? To represent a class in class diagram, we will be drawing some rectangles, and the rectangles will be divided into some compartments. Compartments means we will be dividing the entire rectangle into so many sections, like we divide the diagram into different subparts. Okay, we will see an example very shortly, then it will be more clear to you. And we must write a name, that is the rectangular boxes that we are going to draw, it must have a name. The name must be that of the class. And when we write the name, we have to take care of one point, that is we have to use the mixed case convention. That means the class name must begin with a capital letter. This property is used also when we write the programs in Java. When we write a class name, the class name must be starting with a capital letter. You can see one example here. Library member is actually name of the class, and see how we are writing it. There are 2 words in this class name. Each word is beginning with a capital letter and there are no space between those 2 words. Library is one word, member is another word. We are naming a class like this, library member. So when we name a class like this, the 2 words, library and member, must be beginning with a capital letter. All the other letters must be small letters, and there should not be any space between the words library and member. We will see example how to draw this class. This is the different representations in a class diagram. A class. This is what we mean by compartments. This is one entire class. We are dividing it into different compartments. In this case, there are three compartments. The first compartment represents the class name. The second compartment represents their attributes, like their variable names. Like when we do programs, we'll be declaring various variables. All these variables are used to store some details, right? That forms the second compartment. And the third compartment is their operations, like our functions or methods that we write. So the same class can also be represented like this. We may not, it's not compulsory that all classes must have the attributes and operations, but it is better to represent a class like this. The first figure, there will be attributes, the class name, attributes, and the operations. So this is the representation of a class named library member. This class has got this much attributes and this much operations. So we are not describing how these details or how these attributes are going to work or how these methods are working. What are the lines of code inside these methods or functions? We are not describing that in a class diagram. We are only representing one class and the attributes and the operations inside that class. So the entire class diagram will be consisting of so many rectangular boxes like this and so many lines between these rectangular boxes representing the relationship between them. Now how can we relate one class to the other? That is what we are going to see next. So as mentioned earlier in the previous slide, we saw the figure in which the class name library member consists of two compartments. One compartment is used for the attributes and the other compartment was used for functions or methods. So what's an attribute? Attributes, as you all know, it's a named property of a class. Okay, it represents kind of data that an object might contain, like in the previous slide, as you can see, member name. Name is actually something that each member of the library will be containing. Each of us have a name, so that's kind of data each of the object of a class may contain. Okay, so attributes may, when we write attributes, we can also represent the type of data or what kind of data will be, like int, is it int or is it a float, something like that. We can represent that also. When we write the names of the attributes, it must begin with a lowercase letter. That is a naming convention followed by the UML diagrams. And we can also represent the multiplicity. That means if it is an array, as you all know what an array is, array is collection of data of same type. So if an attribute is an array, we can represent the multiplicity, how many elements it can hold. That can also be represented. Okay, so that is about attributes. Now these are the relationships that exist between classes that we can show between classes when we draw class diagram. The first relation is association. So what is association and how we can represent it? You can see this example here. Here library member and book, there are two classes, and this line and followed by this label with this arrow mark indicates the association. So for representing an association, we have to draw a straight line between the concerned classes, and above the line we must mention the name of the association, and we can also use the arrowhead to indicate the direction, in which direction this relation is going. Okay, so in this case we can say that library member is an association of so many books, and we can write this, you can see this numbers 1 and the symbol star here, that represents the number of people that is engaged in this relation. So this can be read as one library member can borrow so many books, or in other words we can say that so the star represents 0 or more. This star symbol represents 0 or more. So this star symbol is now located towards or near to the class book. So that means 0 or more books can be borrowed by one library member. That's the meaning of this association. I repeat, star represents 0 or more occurrence. So this star is near to class book. So that means 0 or more books can be, and name of the association is borrowed by. So we can read this as, and we can see the number 1. Here only the number is mentioned as 1. Okay, so this entire association can be read like this: 0 or more books can be borrowed by one library member. So this is what we mean by multiplicity. This is 1 and star. This multiplicity can also be represented like this, as we can see in this example. If we know that the value of this multiplicity, the number of books, if we are designing a library management system, and in that each library member can borrow only maximum of 5 books, then instead of star we can write like this: 1 double dot 5. So if you write this 1 double dot 5 instead of star, that means one library member can borrow at least one book and maximum 5 books. That will be the meaning if you write 1 double dot 5 here instead of star. I hope you understood. So this is how we represent the relation association between two classes. Now next one is aggregation. So aggregation, as it is mentioned here, it's a special type of association. It's a special version of the association relation that we saw just now. And see how we are representing this. This figure represents the aggregation of this example for this aggregation. That is, a document can be considered as an aggregation of paragraphs. So what does that mean? We know what a document is, right? A document means collection of so many paragraphs, right? And what's a paragraph? A paragraph is a collection of so many lines. That's what we mean by aggregation. So here the involved cases are not only associated to each other, but a whole part relationship exists between them. So as we can see here, this document and paragraph, they are not just associated, but there is something more between them. That means the number of paragraphs determines the how long the document is. So there is another kind of relation between them also. So we cannot say that they are only just associated. Okay, and how we are representing aggregation by means of an empty diamond at the end, at the aggregate end of the relation. So here document is the aggregation. So this is the aggregate end. So here we have to represent the here we have to draw the empty diamond. And this entire representation can be read like this. As we can see, we have mentioned the multiplicity here also. This one is located near to paragraph. So we can read like this. One paragraph can be considered as an aggregation of so many lines. Similarly, one document can be considered as an aggregation of so many paragraphs. So this is how we represent the aggregation relationship between the classes. I hope you understood the two relations. They are association and aggregation. Aggregation is a special version of association. Next relation is composition or composition. It is also a version of association because it is a stricter form of aggregation. Because aggregation is yet another special version of association. Since composition is a stricter form of aggregation, we can say composition is also a type of association. Okay, so what makes this composition more stricter? Because the parts are existence dependent on the whole. That means you can see this example. Before that, we'll see how we are representing this composition relation. We're using a diamond filled with a color. Okay, so this is known as a filled diamond. In the case of aggregation, diamond was empty, In the case of composition, the diamond is not empty, it's filled. We all place orders in Flipkart and Amazons. We know that an order means there will be at least one item to buy, right? If the number of items are zero, then that means there is no order. So that's a kind of relation that we are representing by composition. If we cancel the order means the entire items are getting cancelled. Or if we cancel all the items means then the order gets cancelled. So that's a relation between them. So that is why we are saying that life of parts cannot exist outside the wall. So here the life of order depends upon the number of items or life of items. So if we cancel the entire order means these items cannot exist. I hope you understood. Okay. So that's a relationship that is the so that such kinds of relationship will be determined or represented by composition. So here also we will be representing the multiplicity, but the difference between composition and aggregation is the diamond that we are going to draw. If the diamond is filled, it is composition. If the diamond is not filled, then it is aggregation. So what's the difference between aggregation and composition? Okay, both represents part whole relationships, but if it is dynamic in nature, that is if the components can be dynamically added and removed, then we can say that the relationship is aggregation. If the components cannot be dynamically added or deleted, then the relationship represented as composition. You can go through this example and see the difference between them. This is the same example as we have seen in the previous slide, that in the case of order and number of items. Now another kind of relation is inheritance. We know what is inheritance, and we have discussed this in the video lecture in which we discussed about the object-oriented programming concepts. So as you can see, how we are representing is by using the arrow mark, a line with an arrow mark. So here the lines are drawn from the subclasses towards a parent class. So here library book is a parent class and all these are subclasses. Okay, so the line is drawn from the subclass towards a parent class and the arrow mark is towards a parent class. Okay, now dependency. Sometimes some classes may depend on something else. So in that case, the line is drawn from the dependent class towards the independent class. The lines that we draw are dotted lines with an arrow mark pointing towards the independent class. Then constraints. Constraints means conditions. Some attributes may take some value based on some conditions. Within a class, some attributes may take some values based on some conditions. So such conditions are what we mean by constraints. Okay, and we use this to describe the permissible set of values of an attribute. That means sometimes an attribute means, as you know, the second compartment inside a class diagram. That represents the variables when we do the program. Like certain variables may take only some values. So such cases will be representing using constraints. So constraints are very rarely used when we draw class diagrams, but suppose in the university examinations you are getting a class diagram and you are asked to explain the class diagram. If in that class diagram there are constraints, then you must know what are they. That is why I included this in this video lecture. Now we will see one example of class diagram. As you can see, we have used all the kind of relationships here. So all together we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 classes in this class diagram. You can see the name of each classes as the first compartment of each class we have drawn here. So we can see here the filled diamond, that means it is composition. You can see the multiplicity marked, then the name of the attributes and the operations of each class. Then see the inheritance relationship shown here. We have not represented the aggregation as well as association, even though composition is a kind of association as well as aggregation. So it's not compulsory that every class diagram must contain all these associations, aggregations, and compositions, everything, inheritance, everything. Depends upon the system that we are modeling. Okay, so this is an example. So we shall conclude now. So in this video lecture, we have discussed about class diagrams, one of the diagram that belongs to the UML category, like use case diagrams, and we saw what a class diagram looks like, how to represent a class, what all things a class will contain, and what are the different types of relationships that we'll be drawing between the classes in a class diagram. And we also saw one example of class diagram. I hope all of you have understood. Thank you so much.